Débat, resuming debate, the honourable member for Essex.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I want to dedicate this speech to every woman who has come forward, part of the Me Too and the Time's Up movements. I want to thank them for their courage and their strength. But I also want to express my extreme, deep frustration that it continues to take women laying themselves bare for the public in order to agitate for change.
Hear, hear.
We need to do better. Today, I hope that I'm passing through this House one small part of their voices. Voices that have reached out to me on social media, that have been sending emails, that have been thankful for those of us who are standing in the House agitating for this change. So I have to tell you that women in our country right now are raising their voices in unison in a way that we haven't seen for a very long time around this issue. And I'm reminded, as my colleague from Nanaimo Ladysmith mentioned, of the 338 women who sat in this House in March of 2017, and the power and the passion that they brought, and the really deep desire that they have, and the hope for a political career here in this House someday. And that extends beyond just our seats here. That extends to everyone who works to support us here in this House, right down to our pages who help support us every day in this House. And I want more than anything for all of them to be free to pursue this career, to pursue this life free of harassment. I want them to see that day come. I don't want them to have to be worried about bracing themselves to face the toxic workplace that they are reading across this country and watching and learning that this place is. And I'll tell you, Madam Speaker, that I came from the labor movement, where I worked in an auto manufacturing facility, and I was one of 15% of women in that workplace. But being part of a union environment, having the protections, having the policies, having the clear and very defined definitions of harassment in the workplace, it went miles to ensure that everyone in that workplace understood their responsibility in doing better. And so in the labor movement, I commend them because they've done an incredible amount of work to eradicate this. And we're not going to have to look too far for policies that work out into the public, out into labor, out into our communities, because they exist, Madam Speaker. We simply need to make sure that they exist here as well. And this behavior that we're talking about is not new, has been raised by a lot of my colleagues today. But it can and it must change. And it's going to take all of us. And to start with, there can be no more whisper campaigns in this House. There can be no more women who are warning other women about who to stay away from, who not to be alone with, because that's unacceptable, and it's a very deep part of our culture here, where women have been trying to protect women through these very subversive campaigns. Well, no more to that. That has to come out in the light of day. We have to shine a light on it, and we have to challenge that behavior each and every time we see it. And not just the women in this House, but every man sitting in this House has to challenge it from other men on a constant basis. And only then will we try to strive to create a workplace that is safe, without these hiding places and these excuses for this behavior. Because it's the excuses that have allowed it to continue to breed, have allowed it to continue on. And I heard a colleague earlier mentioning of the fact that they've had training here throughout the years. Well, clearly it hasn't worked, Madam Speaker. Because if all of those trainings had been successful, and I recognize that this work is ongoing, and this work will take all of us working through our lifetimes to continue to improve it at a, I hope, a better pace than we have been at. But it's clear that we can and we must do better. But for people who have sat and listened to a colleague say something inappropriate and let it go by, that day is done. We can no longer do that in this place. We must challenge it on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of people that we're standing here representing from our riding, but also on behalf of Canadians, because we cannot allow this place to become a mockery, to become just a toxic pool that is to be avoided at all costs, because we're losing the best and brightest in the next generation by not showing them better. And we all hope for those young people to come and take over someday in our seats, as those young women did on International Women's Day. So we have to commit not just to the legislation, which is very important. I'm so happy that everyone in the House provided consensus on the MP from Berthier-Maskinonge, on what she brought up earlier, and getting this to committee as quickly as possible. I think that's critical, that we get to the committee level and we start this very difficult work, and that we do it with the blinders off, that we do it honestly, because we can't bring to that committee the excuses, the hiding places, the reasons why, the reasons that people think that this is just the way that it is here. We have to throw all of that to the side and really work to challenge the structures that have existed here for 150 years in this place, but certainly beyond that, and as one colleague mentioned earlier, for millennial, for the beginning of time. So we have to challenge it at the smallest root, the smallest comment that goes by that we might portray as harmless, or we might say, it's just what men say. It's just something that, men say in a locker room. It's something men, say to other men. These are not harmless. This is the beginning of harm. This is the beginning of letting these things slide by, slide by, slide by, until it affects one individual so badly that their life is forever altered. And we see that happening with women in Canada right now. We see women who are being attacked on social media because they've come forward. That's unacceptable. Unacceptable. And if anyone in this House is in any way aware of people being attacked, we also have a responsibility to speak out, to say that attacking women who come forward is not acceptable. There's due process within the law, and there's due process, hopefully, within our workplace when we have this legislation going forward. But that in no way excuses us for not speaking up when we see it. And we have to take that seriously. And I know that there are men here that I work with every day who don't support this culture, who think it's wrong, who don't behave this way, who don't condone it, who don't teach their sons or their daughters that this is okay. And it's time for those men to start speaking out. Because although this is impacting on women, it impacts on men too. And we know that this isn't a gender issue. This isn't for the women to go and fix.
That's right.
This is for all of us to fix together. So I'd like to dig in a little bit to the actual bill that we have before us. But just before I do that, I want to say that, an example of how women in this House even are struggling to come forward, struggling within our own parties, within this structure, to be able to call this behavior out, is the fact that we had a Canadian press survey that was done for female MPs, anonymous, passed through all of our whips offices in December, and we had very low participation in this survey. Extremely low, I believe below 40% participation of women MPs. Because we exist in a structure where we have parties that we have loyalties to. And women in this place are even afraid to call this out. But women need to be brave, and we need to embolden the men that we sit with as our colleagues every day to be brave as well. So some of the things that we're looking at in this bill, it is an important first step. I will say that, Madam Speaker. But we have to go far beyond where this bill is going. And that will involve that work at committee. That will mean things like a definition. And we've had some conversation here about definition today, whether the definition should be in the bill itself, whether the definition should be part of the regulatory piece that goes along with this legislation. Madam Speaker, defining what harassment is allows us to challenge it. Without that very basis of understanding, how can we educate people in the House as to what it is? This is the very core of the work that we should be doing in this House. So I implore the government to please look at all amendments that come forward by taking that partisan hat off at the door. Because this is work that we're doing for the future of this House. And I will note to you that on International Women's Day last year, when that 338 women sat in this House, that's more women than have ever actually sat here elected. We are doing a poor job in Canada of attracting young women, and this is one of the many reasons why. So we need to do better. I ask for commitment from all of my colleagues to look at the amendments on the basis of the amendments, to put their partisanship aside, and let's do the hard work that's necessary to change this workplace to a zero-tolerance workplace.
Bravo.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? L'honorable député de Longueuil.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. I would like to thank my colleague. What a lovely example, talking about a unionized workplace that has clear protocols, which precisely target the type of behavior to not demonstrate. I would like her to give me more examples where this type of code, this type of offense is clearly outlined. This is what you don't do. How useful this would be, because I was also surprised during her speech in many regards on the statistics, the horrible statistics about harassment in the workplace, how there are certain rules of silence established. I suppose I was a bit naive, or I just never heard about this. And my other colleague, who was talking about how, according to an intern, working here was basically working in a nest of snakes. I would like to hear more about a code and definitions that should be added to this bill. Thank you.
For Essex.
I thank my colleague, and yes, Labour has done an incredible job throughout our country, and I will say that the NDP is proud to have unionized staff from UFCW 232, and they have worked very hard on harassment, anti-harassment language within the collective agreement that we have. And one of the questions we have is really, how will we now mesh what some workers on this Hill have in a collective agreement with what is now being proposed? This is an important understanding, and that also we can draw from the collective agreements that exist across our country on the best practices that exist around harassment policy, around education of that policy. I'm proud in my former life to have done this for the union that I belong to, and it's incredibly important work, because no matter how many times we're educated, things are shifting and changing in our world, certainly with cyberspace, cyberbullying, all the things that are happening outside, which really are an extension of our workplace according to the code. But it's quite shocking to Canadians that we don't actually have labor law that applies to us here on the House or on the Hill. That's quite a shock to most people in Canada. They're completely unaware of that and find that appalling, that this is the only space that exists in Canada where we don't really have any laws to protect people who work here every day with us. One of the things that I can point to specifically that Unifor has is a women's advocate program. And this is someone who has been specifically trained in the workplace for people to access. It's an independent person. They don't provide counseling per se, but they do provide connections to community partners that exist so that people can receive the help that they really do need. And this goes along, of course, with supporting the financial aspect of needing access to those services. And it is something that has worked quite effectively and actually has been lauded at the United Nations as a workplace model to challenge harassment and also to provide people with the information necessary when they really are struggling under the weight of these incidents.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for her speech, and I just wanted to raise one more thing, and that is, in the House today, we're talking about our response to sexual harassment in the workplace, and Bill C-65 will definitely do a lot in order to help us along that journey and make sure that individuals who come forward with allegations are heard and that action is taken. My question is, I'm wondering if the Honourable Member could comment as to what measures could be taken within this place, and perhaps even within other workplaces, but giving priority to this place, what actions could be taken that are preventative in nature in order to make sure that the staff that work for members of Parliament are actually free of victimization?
The Honourable Member for Essex.
Thank you for the question, and I would say that first of all it's going to take an incredible amount of work, a commitment from all of us to be a part of the solution, and it's not just about those of us in the House, it's about the Senate side, it's about people who work for us, our parliamentary protective services, those who are pages in the House, like everyone. So the education that's going to be required is extensive, and I have watched the education video that's provided by the House, and it's lacking. There really isn't enough there. I will tell you that the education that I spoke about that happened in the union I belong to was a 40-hour program. 40 hours for each person. And so, this is a really deep commitment with a yearly follow-up. So every year, one day. So updating that training on a constant basis. This work is never done. This work will, I hope, improve, I hope become better, I hope change things, but really education is the key. And a commitment from everyone that they will challenge this behavior goes an incredibly long way. Because if we continue to sit silent and this opportunity passes us by to improve what we have currently governing us here in this place, then shame on us, because we have missed an opportunity to improve so much for the lives of Canadians. Because when women can do their work free of harassment and focus on their work, I can tell you that that work will just continue to grow, and we will all reap the benefits of that.
Reprise de débat. Resuming debate. Comme il n'y a pas plus de...
As no further members wish to speak, pursuant to the order adopted earlier today, Bill C-65, an act to amend the Canada Labour Code, Harassment and Violence, the Parliamentary Employment and Staff Relations Act, and the Budget Implementation Act 2017, number 1, will now be read a second time. Is deemed to be read a second time. Second reading of this bill.
Accordingly, the bill stands referred to the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities.